Turns out that project was so effective and so necessary that the DoD has continued funding it up until this point, which is the reason that I've got a GPS in my watch and in my phone and in my plane and in my car. And I can use the constellation as a civilian 100% for free to a good enough accuracy to do everything that I need to do. That's the trajectory that we see with drones, is that there's development capital that needs to be spent up front to spin up the American manufacturing defense industrial base that has really sort of atrophied when it comes to high-tech aerospace componentry.
Hey, everyone, and thanks for listening today to another episode of DIB Innovators. Today, I'm speaking with Brendan Stewart, Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at Red Cat Holdings. Brendan, thanks for chatting with me today.
Of course, Dave. Good to be with you.
It's awesome. I know we're, both have a background in aviation, and so I'm excited about this. I think what you guys are doing is awesome, and the whole industry is super cool. For folks that know, they're big drone company that's growing and expanding, helping out our defense brethren. But before that, just a little bit, help the listeners understand where you came from, how you found yourself as in this role at Red Cat.
Sure thing. So I have kind of a non-traditional path through the UAS industry. Went to school for electrical engineering, sort of realized 3/4 of the way through that I didn't want to sit behind a cubicle all day. Did my flight training, my primary flight training around 2014, got a pilot's license. This was right around the time that the FAA released the Section 333 program for UAS. And any of you who've been in the industry for a long period of time know what bad old days those were. But the unique requirement of that was you had to be a pilot, manned pilot, to operate drones commercially anywhere in the country. So started off my business providing flight services. So as a contract pilot for Fox 32 here in Chicago and doing commercials for Infinity Automotive, stuff like that. Eventually pivoted that company to training and compliance services. So we wrote a lot of Section 333 exemptions, wrote a series of FAA waivers. In fact, wrote the first FAA waiver for flight over people back in 2017 outside of the FAA's Project Pathfinder. So it was like Google, CNN, FLIR that were flying over people in this like tiny company out of a basement in Chicago. That was us with a aerostat, like a blimp drone, got that through the aircraft certification office and out and operating in the world. Eventually sold to a company that did drone deliveries, or that still does drone deliveries. They had a major program with Walmart. Spent a year at that company standing up their delivery program and getting them authorized to conduct those delivery operations over people and beyond line of sight for Walmart. Now I'm on the team at Red Cat, and my goal is to drive sort of the policy changes that are necessary to really bring drones into the next level of integration in the NAS and also into the American economy. So my background's aviation. I'm a pilot myself, an aircraft owner, love the aviation side of the business, but it's been really interesting to do some of the other stuff as well, including appropriations and trade policy and all of these sort of what seem like little parochial issues, but really tie into UAS competitiveness and making the technology viable, and most importantly, making American industry viable in this space for the long term.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, regulations and regulatory affairs. Never a super exciting name, but man, is it important, right?
I tell people, Dave, my job on a day-to-day basis, it looks incredibly boring from the outside. You have these like long periods of boredom followed by 2 or 3 days of sheer terror, and then it kind of repeats. But what's really interesting to me is to sort of look backwards at the trajectory we've been able to achieve. That first FAA waiver that I wrote back in 2017 that approved us for flight over people, we presented evidence to the FAA around 11 and 25 foot-pounds of impact energy as the maximum threshold, I should say, for not causing an injury to a person. That was 2017. In 2021, those actually made their way into rulemaking. So the research that we did back in the day putting this waiver together actually turned into policy making. I wish I could say I had something to do with it, but it turns out that just this amalgamation of good ideas, hopefully with lots of work, ends up getting written into law. And that's one of the things that really drives me, is to be able to look back at a body of work and say, okay, yeah, there's going to be a lot of paper pushing. There's going to be a lot of having the same conversation over and over. But at the end of the day, those glacial movements really add up over the long term and create pretty significant change.
Awesome. Well, how about Red Cat? You have been making waves in the drone industry, specifically with military application. What is it about, Red Cat that sets it apart from, I'd say, A, what do you do? And what sets it apart from just other folks in the same space?
Sure. So to put it as simply as I can, Red Cat's a drone manufacturer. Um, that doesn't mean much, but let me illustrate what I mean. There are a lot of drone manufacturers out there that are worried about or focused on creating an entirely vertically integrated solution. They want to build the drone. They want to build the software on the drone. They want to build the box the drone goes in. They want to build all the applications you can run on the drone. They want to build the back end processing. We don't focus on that. We laterally integrate. In the same way that those of us with iPhones can download applications from the App Store, from the Play Store, if you're an Android guy, we focus on building the phone. We work with partners to build everything else to make that system very, very usable and a critical tool both in the warfighter's application to meet their needs, but also elsewhere in industry. One of the things that we found is it's not beneficial to a customer to sell them a whole toolkit because that customer's needs might be specific to their application, might be specific to their industry, and you should allow that customer to tailor the equipment that they're purchasing or the capability that they're purchasing to meet their needs. It's one of the big things that we feel strongly about, and a reason that we've created a new division of our company called Red Cat Futures Initiative that is designed to identify those partners that have core competencies in areas that we don't, whether that be hardware, software, mission capabilities, AI. We have a wireless recharging partner, so the drones can be recharged in flight that we're working on with them, which is a pretty cool application. And we just focus on making the best hardware platform that we possibly can, and then partnering with those other companies to provide a menu of options to the end user, specifically to the warfighter, to allow them to pick the toolkit that's going to best suit the needs of their mission. And I think that's what gives us such an edge is that, you think back in the day of Apple and BlackBerry, right? BlackBerry in 2006, 2007, very vertically integrated, wanted to control the whole package, right? Apple went a different direction. That's the reason that we have an app store. That's the reason that the Android people have the Google Play Store. That's our model. And I think that's what sets us apart.
Interesting. So just the platform. So the navigation system, like the brains and how to maneuver, the launch, the communications, that's all partner initiated, if you will, partner led.
Yeah, so we have our own version of those things, right? So we of course make the GCS. The application that we run on the GCS is produced by a partner. Parts of our navigation system are produced by partners. Parts of our AI capabilities are produced by partners. And those can be tuned sort of up or down based on the end user's needs to provide them a package that makes sense to that. Same way that if you went out and bought a car, you'd be able to go configure that car with whatever options you want. You want heated seats, you can add heated seats. You want navigation, you can add navigation. You want a heated steering wheel, there's an option for that. You want the premium audio package, there's an option for that. But if you want to buy a bare bones work truck, it totally doesn't make sense for you to spend all your money on those options to end up with the same capability to haul material. So that's the way that we look at it, is the same way that you'd buy a car or a truck. We want to provide you the ability to buy a drone that way.
I like it. So what are your, talk to me about your platforms. What are your drone platforms and kind of
Absolutely.
specs?
So Red Cat owns Teal and FlightWave. We have two primary platforms right now. The Black Widow UAS, which is a small ISR capable, long flight time UAS, specifically for like intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. Now we can stack capabilities on top of that system. We can provide the ability to drop objects. We can provide the ability to add third-party payloads. We can extend flight time with some of our other partners' capabilities. We're adding AI capabilities right now with a partner that we work with. And FlightWave, the Edge 130, which is also a subsidiary of ours, is a VTOL fixed wing platform. So one of the challenges that's posed by UAS is that time on target is a critical challenge of multi-rotors, because multi-rotors are burning lots of power even in a hover. You don't have that translational lift benefit that even a helicopter gets of reducing their fuel flow or their power draw by flying into the wind. Now, fixed wing platforms have great on-target duration capability, but traditionally you need a runway to launch them, or you need a wide open area. The Edge 130 provides both vertical takeoff and landing capabilities, hovering capabilities, and the low power draw of a fixed wing. So they can stay on target up to 2 hours from launch. That one has multiple payload options as well. So we've got a standard sort of ISR camera, visual and thermal. We've also got a mapping payload for that as well for doing photogrammetry, which is critical in a lot of industries on the civilian side, whether that be construction, oil and gas, agriculture, et cetera. So we're really excited about that platform. We acquired them about 3 months ago, and we're rapidly scaling up their production to bring it to market.
So size-wise, the Black Widow is how big?
That's about 18 inches across with the arms extended. The Edge 130, if I recall correctly, it's about 3.5 feet. Wingspan's about arm's length.
And these are they electric powered, or are they?
Yeah, they're all electric powered, right? So they're all brushless electric, lithium batteries, pretty typical of what you see out there in the industry. I think what makes the Black Widow unique is their ability to be packed down and be man portable. So the arms on the Black Widow fold up. It can fit in a soldier-borne case that's very easy to maneuver around. Same with the Edge 130. It's not this big, fixed wing thing that you have to lug around. The wings come off, the payload comes off, and it's a flying wing configuration, so it doesn't have a traditional tail empennage like you would imagine a manned aircraft would have. And we can get away without the need for that with some of our navigation capabilities, and also some of the aerospace engineering that we've done to make that platform as small as possible and as aerodynamically efficient as possible.
Cool. And what's the range? And you said 2.5 hours. So imagine the range for the Edge 130 is, pretty good distance.
Yeah, I don't want to give you a quote off the top of my head, but those are systems that can get out, multiple kilometers comfortably and stay out there for quite some time. On the civilian side, we're limited to within visual line of sight, as you can imagine, and that really depends on conditions. But multiple kilometers, 4, 5, 6 kilometers is no problem in military applications.
Great. So what are your, you mentioned ISR, but do you have any specific customers and use cases where you've seen, cool successes with our government partners? Your government.
Of course, yeah. We, as the Department of Defense is a big customer of ours. We have a major contract with the Air Force right now for doing base security. That's one of the things that I think about as an aircraft owner is airport security is hard, especially if you've got a lot of them. Not every airport in the country has TSA. As a matter of fact, the airport that my plane's at does not have TSA. So the idea for maintaining base security for the Air Force that's got classified assets, also Customs and Border Protection, CBP, is a major client of ours. They're using them actually on both borders, not just the southern border, but the northern border as well. They are currently our largest customer by number of flight hours per year. So they have a smaller number of systems in DoD, but they fly them nearly constantly. We're getting lots of long-term, reliability data from them, and they've been a great partner to work with to, really tune our systems to meet the needs of a government user that's relying on these toolkits, day in and day out, every single day to get their mission done.
So since some of that's work, in the United States, you'd also have to deal with commercial regulations as well as military requirements. How do you guys weigh those out, and how does that work?
Yeah, so there are, there's an interesting separation of responsibilities. So when we produce a product for DoD, that product is typically provided to the DoD in a configuration that you as a civilian cannot get, right? In the same way you can't go to a car dealership and buy a Humvee, you're not going to be able to call up Teal and get a military grade drone. But we've still got to fly them, test them, certify them, because we're a private company and we're held to follow the federal aviation regulations just like anybody else who's non-DoD. So that means we have to get FCC experimental authorizations for radio frequencies that we are not authorized to use under FCC Part 5 and 15. It means we have to get approvals from the FAA to do things like fly without remote ID, for instance, as we configure military grade drones that don't have to have remote ID modules in them. And as we sell to the civilian side, it's to use the car analogy again, we got to have headlights, taillights, turn signals. It's got to have a catalytic converter on it. It's got to be crash tested. But one of the challenges with that is it adds a lot of cost, right? The same part coming from the general aviation side, the starter solenoid that goes in my airplane is like the same as a starter solenoid off of, any American car from the 70s. But the difference between the starter solenoid that you can buy at, AutoZone and the one that you buy from, Piper or Textron is about $200 a difference. And the only reason for that is because one of them's got to be certified by the FAA, and it's got to go through lifetime reliability testing. It's got to have a PMA, a parts manufacturer approval. So there's cost to spitting stuff in the civilian market. And that's one of the reasons that we focused on defense first, is because defense provides us a lot of patient capital to take a technology, to get that technology to maturity, and then, build that into the civilian market once the cost basis is covered. Because effectively, the use case for somebody like Border Patrol and your local police department is not all that different. They're using the aircraft for very, very similar purposes. The difference is the regulations that they're held to are pretty significantly different, and the requirements that the end user has to demonstrate to the FAA are different. So by developing that technology in a less constrained environment, allows us to then move that technology more cost effectively into the hands of civilian and public safety operators.
So you mentioned, patient capital. It's actually interesting. Hardware startups are difficult when going direct to the DoD as your first customer.
Yep.
In the past, there hasn't been patient capital. Are you seeing that? You look at a lot of these, AFWorks and different innovation projects. They're driving unique commercial first because that's your viability to get private capital. Yes, then the government can be an off-ramp. But there are companies, you get the Palantirs and Shield A. There are other companies that have been able to start with defense. How have you navigated that? Have you seen a difference in the willingness for private capital to jump into spaces like yours?
Yeah, and I think the thing that makes us unique in this space specifically is we're publicly traded. Right. Many of the drone companies that have come and gone, and this has been a very difficult area to compete in. I remember when I started the drone industry, 2014, 2015. There were companies like 3D Robotics. 3D Robotics had the Solo back in the day. If you were around at that point in the industry, you'd probably remember. They couldn't compete. They couldn't scale up their manufacturing well enough. They had some quality issues early on. Their capital wasn't patient enough. GoPro built a drone. They no longer have a drone division. They were not able to get the cost model, and quality was also an issue, but they were not able to get the cost model right fast enough to keep private investment interested. And if you think about the way that, your average venture capital fund is set up to operate, they're in the mindset of software startups. You spend a bunch of money up front, and then in 2 to 5 years, you've 10x'd your money. Hardware does not work like that. In 2 to 5 years, you've maybe got a product, and you've maybe started with a couple of sales, right? Hardware takes forever. It's very capital intensive. It's very risky. It cost us tens of millions of dollars to build the first drone model that we have. Now we've iterated on that over a period of years, and now we're at a point where we've got a very capable product that we're able to get in the hands of DoD. But what makes Red Cat different is because we're publicly financed, we've sort of parallelized that capital out into the public market. And it's not a single investor or 2 or 3 investors on the P&L. It's potentially thousands or tens of thousands. So that provides us a unique opportunity. And the example that I like to give, especially with DoD investment, is if the DoD did not invest in a project called Navstar back in the 1960s, we would not have civilian GPS. Navstar was originally this project to target nuclear missiles on nuclear submarines. The idea being, well, back in the 60s, you didn't really have super accurate positioning. And if you needed to launch a missile off of a sub, you had to start with an initial position calculation on that missile so you could figure out exactly where it was going to go and set those inertial calculations off on the right trajectory. Being off by a couple of nautical miles in the ocean from your launch point would mean the difference between that missile hitting, Moscow or Berlin. And that was a problem big enough that the DoD spent $12 million in, I believe it was the 1968 NDAA. $12 million in the 60s is not $12 million today to launch the first handful of GPS satellites. Turns out that project was so effective and so necessary that the DoD has continued funding it up until this point, which is the reason that I've got a GPS in my watch and in my phone and in my plane and in my car. and I can use the constellation as a civilian 100% for free to a good enough accuracy to do everything that I need to do. That's the trajectory that we see with drones, is that there's development capital that needs to be spent up front to spin up the American manufacturing defense industrial base that has really sort of atrophied when it comes to high-tech aerospace componentry. And once that flywheel is spinning, now the cost model is down. Now it's the same as an iPhone. Now it's the same as a, Garmin watch like I have, or the laptop that I'm talking to you on. And the ability to have patient capital, whether that be, from the public markets, or whether that be through a organization like the Office of Strategic Capital, right? Even DoD realizes that this is a national security issue, which is why the Office of Strategic Capital exists. Those mechanisms, I think, are what's going to allow us to revitalize our industrial base to the point where we can start making, cost competitive and quality competitive products to, whatever one of the consumer world is used to, which the Chinese have been doing for 30 years.
Amongst other things. Yeah, it is interesting, as, a lot of these DoD innovation groups are reaching out to the commercial sector to drive the innovation, where previously it was the military was driving it, or DoD, and then would push it out. So that definitely is transitioned. So that's interesting. So where do you see, from a platform company, how do you guys see yourself expanding? Because it seems like a lot of the growth would be in the capability set of the software and, implementation of AI.
Yep.
You're just a phone company. I mean, like the iPad or iPhone, where they have a lot of different technology. So that's not necessarily a great comparison. But if you're just the platform, do you see the ability to scale, or is this more long-term, like your platform will be the standard?
It is kind of both. And let me go back to your Apple analogy. I think that's a great analogy because, Apple makes a bunch of different platforms, but they make them for different use cases and they make them for different purposes, right? I wouldn't be trying to take this Zoom call on an Apple Watch. I probably could on my phone, but it wouldn't be great for this interview format. So now I have different products for different purposes, but they all run the same toolkit of applications. Mm-hmm. They all run the same suite of possible accessories. That's how we view the development of our product line. There are going to be different drones for different purposes. You're never going to use a fixed wing drone or even a VTOL fixed wing drone and apply it to the same application that you'd use a rotorcraft for. It just wouldn't make sense, right? It's as I've said before in some of my other talks, it's the same reason that I don't commute to work in a helicopter. I certainly could, right? But the cost associated with that and the complexity associated with that is sort of not worth it for that use case. However, unlike some other companies that are out there in the marketplace, our integration with partners allows that whole family of systems to interact together, to share data, to operate on the same GCS, to operate with the same data collection backend. And that, we believe, is going to provide the end user maximum utility as they're able to tune that suite of tools to meet their needs and just use whatever drone makes sense for the given mission they have at that time.
That's interesting. So are you seeing then, in this space, how's the drone industry going to continue to change? Where is this a lot in the regulation side, or is it more in the capability side? How will this shift in the next 3 to 5 years?
Sure. I think in the next 3 to 5 years, there's two things that are going to happen. The first thing is that capabilities have been outstripping the regulatory environment for a long time. There's one change that we're waiting on right now, which is the Part 108 rulemaking process, which will open up beyond visual line of sight operations. And beyond visual line of sight operations are already happening, but they're happening under these very limited waiver projects. Either public safety gets a close proximity, low altitude certificate of authorization to be able to do, mission critical life safety operations beyond line of sight, whether a drone delivery provider gets a beyond line of sight waiver to only do point-to-point deliveries. These are very specific, very constrained, very localized operations. It is not as effective as turnkey and go. So if you're a power utility, right? Commonwealth Edison, the big power utility that's owned by Exelon, here in Illinois, where I'm from, they have to survey all of the power lines in the state of Illinois every 7 years by federal law. They're doing that with helicopters right now. They have drones. They have a drone team. In my previous life, I trained a lot of their drone team and did some of their compliance. The problem is the cost model of drones, because it's very, single person to single drone and within visual line of sight, is still a very high cost model operation. Guy flies a drone down a power line a quarter mile, flies it back, gets in his truck, drives a quarter mile, and does it all over again. You could rent the helicopter and do 150 miles in a day. The Part 108 rulemaking is going to dramatically change that. The ability to operate more than one drone from a single GCS is going to radically change that. We think those regulatory changes are going to begin to drive ubiquity. That's kind of point one. Point two is this investment by DoD to re-energize the American Defense Industrial Base. We believe that that is going to drive the cost model to a point where drones will be the no-brainer solution to these problems. Even at the cost model that American-made drones are now, they're significantly cheaper to operate than a manned aircraft. I mean, by quite literally an order of magnitude, a factor of about 10. But when the cost of acquiring those drones is equivalent to the cost of acquiring a cell phone, it's a no-brainer. Every single organization, in the civilian sector that needs to do any sort of aerial inspection, needs to do delivery of critical supplies or goods, that's going to become a drone function sort of by default. From the DoD's perspective, most of those close-in ISR activities are going to have to happen by small drones, even in the electronic warfare environment, because there's a constant arms race. You can always harden your drone to EW, and we've seen the sort of the lessons from Ukraine and what we project modern warfare will look like in the Pacific. Drones are an indispensable asset. There's sort of they're the equivalent of tanks to World War I. There will be no way to go back now that this is out of the bottle.
Yeah. How has Ukraine affected you guys specifically with, cardboard box, toilet paper tubes, an engine, and, launching weapons from it or making it a weapon itself? Like, how has, that whole, say, rapidly evolving capability set, that Ukraine's, doing their tests, development, evaluation all at the same time while executing? How's it shaped you guys or affecting you guys?
Yeah, great question. I think the biggest effect that I can point to is that it has crystallized for, the Defense Department, the value of these technologies and the value of moving quickly. Traditionally, right, you think of the programs of record from 20 years ago. The beginning of the Iraq War, you'd standardize on one drone asset that would live for 20 years. Well, the problem is by the time you buy that drone asset, it's already antiquated because it took you 3 to 5 years to go through that program of record process. I think DoD is realizing from some of the lessons learned in Ukraine that you can't procure drones like you procure airplanes, because A, they'll be obsolete, B, the cost of procurement exceeds the cost of the device, and C, unlike manned assets, drones are attritable. The whole reason that we focus on unmanned technology, both in the civilian sector and defense, is they're low cost, they're relatively easy to use, and they are potentially disposable. You can put them in places and in circumstances that you wouldn't want to put a human pilot or a multi-$100 million asset. And fundamentally, I think that's the biggest change that we've seen. Is there a possibility to do contracting and development? I mean, yes, we have drones in Ukraine now. We've done a lot of development with the Ukrainian MOD to make sure that our drones are sort of responsive to an electronic warfare environment and are able to continue operating. But I think the biggest change is the shift in the paradigm for how procurement needs to happen in the 21st century.
Well, that's great. All right. Sure. So you've got two use cases that I'd like to hear from you of what's in the realm of possible that, you think about drones all the time.
Oh yeah.
I think they're cool. I don't necessarily think, but on a military side, somewhere where we would use a drone that wouldn't be natural for just me to think about. And same thing on the commercial side, like where would be two very unique things that drone capability will help.
Absolutely. So let me speak to the civilian side first. So one of the things that folks think of is public safety, right? Obvious corollary from DoD. That's well understood. They think of infrastructure inspections. That's really well understood. I got a call really early in my career from a guy that worked for a glass company that was responsible for inspecting high-rise structures. Because the glass on a high-rise structure is physically structural. And in order to do that, they have to get people on a scaffold like one of those extendable scaffolds that's hung from the top. It's an incredibly dangerous job. It's very difficult to ensure. And as a result, it's very costly to do. And at the time, there weren't drones that could safely do that. You couldn't safely get within a couple inches of a structure like the Willis, formerly Sears, it's still the Sears Tower in Chicago, without getting into a collision, without having, air traffic risk of some sort. So that's an area that I thought of at the time. I'm like, man, he's right. There's nobody in the drone space thinking about this. Now, you think about how many structures in New York need that kind of inspection, in Chicago, in LA, in like every major city across the country. That's certainly an area that I think about. On the DoD side, one of the areas that we think about drones for, I would say most commonly, is ISR, and then dropping of things, right? Like we've seen in Ukraine, drones use the strike devices. That's sort of easy to wrap your head around. Another one you might not think about is a communications relay. In an environment where there's a lot of electronic warfare going on, it can be very difficult to get communications in and out from teams in the field. So by providing a fixed site, an asset that can fly around and just serve as a communications relay between, one team with an encrypted radio and another team that can't directly talk to each other because they're over the horizon or beyond radio line of sight, or they're transmitting in low enough power that they don't want to leave an electronic signature. That's another opportunity. And the DoD does this right now with manned assets. But if you're in a contested environment where your enemy has air superiority, you're not able to launch a manned asset to provide that communications relay. It's also very conspicuous having an airplane flying around in like circles overhead. So communications relay is one of the areas that I thought of, because specifically it doesn't require you to carry a heavy payload. You can replace that heavy payload with batteries. You've already got a radio on the drone, so all you have to do is retune the radio. And it could be something that, in theory, could be done with off-the-shelf drones. You could just take off the camera module, add a second battery, reprogram the radio through an application, and run a communications relay. It would not be a technically difficult challenge. Now, I can't confirm or deny whether we're working on any of these things, but those are the things that come to my mind just as, a guy that's been in the drone industry forever.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and you have a lot of redundancy. You could put up a lot, so definitely opportunity there.
Absolutely.
Well, cool. Well, wrapping up, what advice would you give to folks who are, or companies, emerging companies in defense tech that want to break into this? That there are other drone companies, just other companies in defense tech, both from the regulatory as well as just working within the DoD or the defense side. What thoughts do you have for them? Recommendations that would be helpful?
Yeah, I think there's three things that I would recommend. I mean, first is, and this is going to sound like a cliche, but don't try to boil the ocean. Find something you're really good at, focus on that one critical mission or that critical application, and focus on providing value there. Going back to the GPS analogy, when the initial Navstar satellites were launched, they were only there to do one thing. And through that success, they eventually became this ubiquitous technology that most Americans couldn't live without today. So there's no reason to, in my mind, come up with a 100% vertically integrated stack, especially if you're a small company that's just starting out. The second is, don't underestimate the power of partnerships. Our partnerships have made us successful, and we believe it's through our partnerships that will continue to be successful and will continue to grow. An example, I go back to the car analogy, right? If you drive a Toyota's not building their own tires. They're contracting with Bridgestone. They're not building their own engine sensors. Denso makes the engine sensors, right? You end up with a bill of materials where most of the parts that go into that Toyota car or truck don't actually come from Toyota. So don't underestimate the power of partnerships, which kind of leads into one, right? You don't need to do everything, because partnerships will carry you to that degree of success. And, maybe I'm just saying this myself as a guy that does this, but don't underestimate the power of advocacy. A mentor of mine that has worked in the space for a long time frequently says, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. So through those partnerships, having access to policymaking is going to be critical to A, make sure that there's a market for your products. B, make sure that the regulatory environment moves in a way that allows you to have a market for your products. One of the worst things that could happen is you're building a product expecting regulations to change in 5 years, and they don't, because the government doesn't realize that they have to in order for you to sell your product. You'd be surprised that those of us outside our industry have very little visibility into the problems of our industry. So those three things, right? Focus on doing what you do well and really hone that one area before you expand. Two, make sure you utilize partnerships to the best of your ability to be successful. And three, make sure that if government is going to be your customer, that you build that relationship with your regulators in the same way that you would build that relationship with a client. I think if you're able to do those three things and you have enough patient capital to carry you through that process, you're going to be very successful.
Well, that's great advice. I like it. If you don't have a seat at the table, you're on the menu.
That's right.
That's great. Well, unfortunately, Brendan, that's all we have time for today. But before we wrap, if people want to follow what Red Cat Holdings is doing, how's the best way to get information and keep in touch?
We're all over the place. You can check out our website at redcat.red. We're on Twitter. We're on LinkedIn. I'm not the marketing guy, so I don't know everywhere where we are, but Google us. You'll see us all over the place.
Awesome. Well, this has been really fun. Appreciate the conversation. Learned a lot. I think you're spot on. There's a lot of opportunity here, and I will definitely be following closely. But let's keep in touch, and thanks again.
Indeed, Dave. Thanks so much for your time. It's been fun.